Hello and welcome back to everyone in this session. We've just had a great session before with Sarah Thornhurst talking about inclusive language in communications, and that was a brilliant session with lots of takeaways. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And now we are back with a panel for the PRCA public sector group. But as always, don't forget to use the emojis to show your love and put your comments in the chat so we can hear what you're taking away from this session. Please also use the Q&A tab so that we can do some questions at the end. Also, please do share your screen grabs or any of your pictures of you in your commsHERO swag and post those on social media using the hashtag commsHERO so that you can be in for a prize, which will be announced, I think, at the end of the week. So this session is going to be chaired by Marcus, and his panelists are Carrie-Anne Wade, Emma Delaney and Simon Jones. They're going to be talking about how in the time of COVID, communications changed rapidly and teams had to adapt to new systems and new processes. And they're going to be talking about whether teams are still operating in that way now or if they've reverted to pre-COVID practices. So this is going to be a really fascinating session, hearing from all of these people with their own expertise and experience in leading communications teams. So over to you, Marcus.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carly. And hopefully you can see me and hear me. We had the good old technical issues before this, but while we're all paddling very quickly like swans, I'm looking serene now, hopefully. But anyway, I want to thank my panel for being here today. And just to add to what Carly said, so I'm chair of the PRCA Public Sector Group, and with me, Carrie-Anne, is my vice chair. And we've got two other august people in this meeting, and you've probably read the bios, but it's probably good just in context for just people just to introduce themselves, so they can, so colleagues watching can understand where we come from. To kick off myself, I am a senior account director at Westco, but at the moment I'm standing in as the head of comms at Havering Council, so I'll be talking from a local authority point of view. Carrie-Anne, would you like to come next?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Carrie-Anne Wade. I'm the Director of Communications, Engagement and Charitable Funds at North East London NHS Foundation Trust, and we're a mental health and community services NHS provider across North East London, Essex and Kent.
Thank you. Simon?
Hi, I'm Simon Jones, Director of Communications at Westco, and for those who don't know Westco, we're an agency originally from Westminster City Council that now works with public sector organisations up and down the UK.
Thank you. And Emma?
Thank you, Marcus. Hello, everybody. Emma Delaney. I'm the Director of Communications at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. I think for the benefit of this conversation, I'm probably going to be reflecting back on my time at NHS London, where I came across Marcus and colleagues. So yeah, thank you for having me today.
Yeah, and actually, we all worked very closely together during COVID, and we were in the numerous lockdowns, etc. And that really is what it is that we wanted to talk about, because I mean, obviously restrictions have been raised, and we're all trying to go about our normal lives, or are they normal? We obviously, I think we learned some. Well, I believe we learned some valuable lessons during COVID, and this is not just from individual mental health point of view and working in a workspace or working from home point of view. So, but also about how we communicated to our publics, to our citizens, to our patients, etc. So, this conversation born out from a conversation Carrie-Anne and I had about, well, what's changed? Do we think that we're still doing things the way we've always done it? After, I won't call it the blip, but after, we did amazing things, or so I believe we did amazing things during COVID, Are we just doing everything the way we used to do it, or have we changed? Or have we learned something new? So this was just about drawing on that learning and just hopefully sharing with colleagues here whether that learning has changed the way we think and do things, and whether we've got better or have we got worse what we do. I don't know. So I'll open it up. I suppose one of the interesting things for me is one of the great drivers, in my opinion, was we actually had some cash to do things. So I'll kick that off straight away. So via the government, via the wonderful NHS, to local authorities to deliver COVID comms, and quite clearly to encourage people, number one, to follow the rules, which is what we were doing in the early days, and then after that, encouraging people to get their jabs. So I'll open it up to Carrie Ann, who we worked quite closely in North East London, actually, didn't we? So just kicking that off, really. Did you find straight away you was looking at doing things in a different way?
Yeah, I think so. I guess for me, some of the highlights or the positives that have come out of the pandemic, if there have been any, and that hopefully we're continuing, is I did feel like it helped to break down some of those boundaries between organisations in terms of the way we decided to communicate, both externally and internally. I think we were all working towards one common goal, rather than feeling like sometimes we have done in the past where we've perhaps been in competition for the same airspace or targeting the same audiences. I think we did really come together as a team, and I know Emma probably has got quite a lot to say around that point. But I guess also for me, from an internal communications point of view in my organisation, I think weirdly, even though we were in a space where we had lockdowns and some people, more people than normal were asked to work from home and work differently, I think the visibility of our leadership team actually grew and was strengthened through COVID, because we didn't take so long to get on board with new channels. So we're like, right, we're doing a weekly webinar. We're going to utilise all of the digital innovation we've got to hand to enable people to be more accessible and to actually have two-way dialogue. And that's something that in my organisation that we've definitely continued. Those comms channels are still there. And every time we ask the organisation, should we stop having the weekly webinar now? They're like, no. We get, we've got like 300 people on it. Being able to ask questions of our senior leadership team in a way perhaps they weren't able to before, due to the size and nature of our organisation. So for me, I think it presented opportunities to develop new channels and to make different people and different teams in the organisation weirdly more visible to each other, even though we were in a space where we weren't allowed to come together in person. So for me, that's been a positive that we are trying to continue.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie Ann. And I think, especially when we start to get to the place where we was encouraging different communities to get their vaccinations, I think we learned how to reach those communities we don't normally speak to. So, and I know, Emma, when you was sitting there in your kind of position at a strategic level, the conversations we had in London about how do we reach. So I was looking at statistics, which is brilliant. So one of the brilliant lessons we learned is the wonderful statistics we're able to see whether things were working or not. But what we're also seeing from those statistics is that certain groups weren't getting their vaccinations. So, for example, in certain parts of London, we had broken down to Pakistani communities or Jewish communities, and Hackney had a particular issue around Jewish communities. And where I was in Havering in East London, North East London, in particular Eastern European communities. So one of the things we were looking at is how do you reach those communities? I don't know, Emma, if that's something that you remember and you kind of did some work around.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. Do I remember a lot? It feels like a century ago, doesn't it, folks? I mean, there's certain. I reflect back, and I always think when I see you guys that these people remember what we went through. But it really showed what Carrie Ann talks about, that one campaign. Certainly, when we didn't have a vaccine, we really relied on public messaging, and it really showed the sort of true power of comms and public messaging like never before. And then certainly as we came out of that dark period and relied on what the government were going to announce at the 6 o'clock press conference that night, I think the vaccines gave us hope, didn't it? Because it was a way out of this. And I think I've never really seen in my entire career is seeing that at a London level, working with the mayor's office and working with local authority like never ever before. Really, we all had one mission, one campaign. There was no boundaries. There was no bickering really about that's somebody else's job to do. We all showed just we need to get out of this and we need to work together. Which is a credit to everybody at London councils and at local authority, quite frankly. I think those relationships are something I'd never want us to lose. And certainly we had our Mayor of London really championing us out there every day. And when we went out to the vaccines, God, what an exciting period. We were having vaccine pop-ups at the Tate Modern. We were talking to Ministry of Sound. We did pop-ups in Soho, GAY, Chinatown. And then when we reached the Selden Herd, you're right, Marcus, like I think we all, certainly local authority, we learned a lot in the NHS because I think we haven't got it cracked in terms of how we engage with our service users. But I think that's what I hope we'd really hold on to is actually now we know how to reach these people. I don't think they were hard to reach. I think it was just we pulled together like never before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think the old-fashioned hackney turn of hard to reach. I think we've moved on a bit. I think you're right. I think it's about how do we. I mean, as a local authority, I think we're fairly good at talking to our communities, but there are still communities we're not engaging with well enough, and I think that's one of the lessons we learned during COVID is how to, in particular, say, reach our Eastern European communities and work with our faith groups as well. I mean, I've never worked with faith groups before to encourage them to encourage their, the people who attended their mosques or churches, etc., to go to a pop-up. And we had a pop-up in a mosque. It's the first time we've ever done that. But I mean, one of the other things we learned is how to use modern technology and digital advertising to reach communities as well. And maybe Simon, you want to talk a bit about that because we worked with you and the Council Advertising Network, didn't we?
We did, that's right. And I guess just to start though, Marcus, I think what the response did underline, and not that anyone on this particular webinar needs to hear, it needs to be reminded of this, but the importance of strategic communications to the successful delivery of public services generally. I think for CEOs, for public sector leaders, we really proved the case around why investment is needed in communication and the kind of literally life-saving role that had when it came to the pandemic, and the brilliant work that we saw across the country from comms teams really underlined our worth, I think. And I hope that's a lesson that continues to be kind of, if you like, reminded in the subsequent coming months and years ahead, why we need strong communications in public services. But yeah, you're right, there was some fantastic use of technology in response as well. And we worked with lots of councils around using data and insight in order to really target communities effectively online, using paid advertising predominantly, but really kind of harnessing the power of data and insight, understanding where our communities are, where they are online, what's most likely to influence them, and then targeting that very precisely at those communities. We saw some great data. There's some fantastic examples where you can really show how the impact of the campaign had on vaccination rates over time, and there was an absolute linear kind of correlation between the actual campaign and spend on the campaign and actual vaccination rates, and had to have that kind of detailed evaluation, detailed use of data was really moved us on. I think that's something that we'll continue, we'll build on as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's absolutely right for you to make a point about strategic communications, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But I think the lesson we learned is how you use new technology to reach audiences, and as you say, you're actually able to track whether they're interacting with you or not. And one of the new things we did is actually gamify comms. So one particular group that we was trying to reach was young men, because we saw statistically they weren't getting their jabs. But before that, we ran a poll about whether they were following the rules or not, because we anecdotally were seeing that young men were less likely to wear masks, etc. So we did some online polls, which we gamified, i.e., created an online quiz, which encouraged young people to engage and then click through to find out more information about why they should follow the rules. And then following on from that, working with our Eastern European communities, we translated things into their languages, and we're able to hit them. For example, we know that Romanian or other groups might be watching a music video on YouTube, and an advert will appear, which is leading them on to more information in their own language about getting a jab or where to get one. So all these are new lessons that we learned actually, and we've not used before. So just kind of broaden it out about, we've learned lessons. Are we using them now? And so just going to that point about using digital communications to reach our audiences, absolutely, yes. And one really great example for us is, moving on from COVID, is trying to encourage more people to become foster carers. We use similar techniques, digital advertising, gamified it slightly, and created more interest than the good old-fashioned sticking poster in shopping centres. And so actually we started to learn some great lessons where we were so used to doing things a certain way. It took something like COVID for us to take a step back. And yes, we're all working 100 miles an hour, but actually start looking at doing things differently. I don't know, Carrie-Anne, does that work? Is that the same for you? Are you finding the same with talking to patients or others?
Yeah, I think for us, from a communications point of view, it's definitely been about how we are using that intelligence and that data to inform future work and future campaigns, which I think is something in the NHS, in my experience, often we say we don't have time to do because we're already moving on to the next thing. But I think as a comms team, we're getting much better at doing that. I think one of the things that we learned, sorry, just moving it slightly away from digital, Marcus, but was keen to share is just the importance of looking after our own well-being as communications professionals and the well-being of our teams. And I guess the one thing that I really hope we can take forward as we've come out of the COVID pandemic is that need to look after our own well-being and realise how much we're impacted by the nature of the work that we do, because I do feel like we're moving into the next pandemic, which is the cost of living crisis, and the impact that's having on all of our communities, and in particular on our public sector in terms of our workforce, I think is huge. And so I think if there's any lessons that we've learned around looking after our well-being, we need to keep those going, because we're in another sustained kind of long crisis situation that we're trying to help manage from a comms point of view.
Yeah, no, I believe you're absolutely right. And I would suggest just looking at us all sitting at home or wherever we are, the other bit it made us do is think differently about how we work as well, didn't it? Because we all used to go into offices and we always thought that was the way you do things, but actually hybrid has become the new fashion, if you like. And email, I suppose, that was an interesting lesson, wasn't it, about how we will work together wherever we were sitting in London or around the country.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, it wasn't just NHS. We were all lots of us, all parts of London and across the country coming together. And I think that's where digital, Teams, Microsoft and other platforms really helped sort of support that agility for us to work more dynamically. So it was possible for public sector. I know people may have a view, but actually we showed our dynamism in that period, didn't we? We moved quite quickly and made decisions quite quickly. I think it's, I want to go back to what Carrie-Anne is talking about, this cost of living, and it's certainly how the NHS is feeling right now is this relentless sort of pace that people have been working over the last, we're coming up to 2.5, 3 years of this pace. And now we're looking at a kind of a winter of maybe we call it the winter of discontent. But if you're an NHS worker right now, and you're reading the media headlines, it's not feeling that great, is it? So how do we support these people who've really stepped up and gone and done the extra hour shift, or really stepped up and helped us? And how are we going to get them through the next couple of weeks and months? So I think from an NHS perspective, it's really thinking workforce is probably our number one priority now, and really how we use the tools and the channels that we've used previously and our connections with public sector wider, I think is where we probably need to be thinking next.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, you're absolutely right to talk about cost of living, and from a local authority point of view, which has had less and less money from government over the years. So we're going through our own cost of living crisis alongside residents. Inflation, for example, is affecting everybody. And I know, Simon, you've been looking at cost of living, haven't you, over at Westco?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we'll see that continues from the pandemic as well is that the necessity to use shared resources and pooling resources and efforts across the public sector. There's some great examples of COVID that have now been extended to other areas like adult social care recruitment and foster care recruitment, where instead of individual teams having to design campaigns and reinvent wheels themselves, what we're now beginning to see is an environment where all that content is being shared across different organizations. We're able to localize stuff, but you actually got a whole bank of content and a whole bank of campaign strategy that's ready made that teams can take and deliver immediately on the ground, localize when needed, and you don't have to reinvent wheels. And at a time when I think resources are going to become ever more constrained and become tougher in terms of securing those resources, we have to look much more around collaboration and pooling resources in order to deliver what we need to deliver.
Get more bang for your buck, absolutely.
More bang for your buck, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And just pick up the point you was making earlier on about, Simon, about the value of comms and strategic communication. So I mean, working in the public sector, I've been in the the ups and downs of expanding teams getting smaller, chief execs or other leaders investing in teams and then not and then going through a restructuring and teams being reduced in size. And I kind of believe that you're absolutely right, Simon, when you talk about understanding the worth of strategic comms and about how comms made a real impact, because and I think we're learning it all the time now, but at the time of COVID, I almost felt like a light bulb came on, because when they said the best way to reach most of our residents is through our comms and engagement teams, and they invested in us to do that, it made a massive difference. Because and I think we had some real outcomes and results we could show the value of what we do, and I think that's always a challenge. So I mean, Karen, do you find now that do you think there has been a change, or it wasn't a problem for you? I don't know. How does it feel to you?
I definitely think there has been a shift in terms of people across the organisation and externally definitely seeing the value of communications. I think, and it's something that I talked about earlier today, I think there's something for us about how we demonstrate that aligned to our organisational objectives and priorities, and kind of stepping outside the sphere, I guess, of pure comms in terms of the data and the insight that we share, but actually talking about how we're helping to engage communities, boost the vaccine rates, whatever that may be, because I think that's what gives us that kind of broader voice at the leadership table, if I'm honest, being able to talk beyond our own portfolios as communicators, and really talk about the impact we're having for our patients, residents, whomever that might be, staff groups, is the key bit for me that we need to continue to avoid other people not slipping back to treating comms like we're just here to upload articles into a newsletter and update the website.
Yeah, and the age-old conversation about whether comms is at the top table or not was answered, wasn't it? Because in fact, at some point, comms was leading the top table, I would say, in some respects, because they were coming to us to basically get those outcomes that they needed. And Emma, I mean, you was at the top table, wasn't you? I mean, during the whole time, and I'm assuming that you feel that that's kind of benefited you moving forward.
Try and get me off the table now. But yeah, I think it definitely, you know, it is definitely, you realise comms, we're not just, as Carrie-Anne said, the channel that, oh, can you just doll that up, please, or put that tweet out or a press release. We have voices of influence. We represent what the public think. I think we're the common sense barometer sometimes, quite frankly. So I think, you know, there needs to be definitely that respect about what we can influence and actually shape. And certainly, I definitely think at NHS London, I think they had a bit of an eye-opener, really, in terms of actually the more evidence we could give them to say, you know, what you said earlier about social media, this is what the people are saying, this is what they want, and having that data to back what you're pushing really helps. But I do think we represent the voices that sometimes aren't heard. So I think is another thing. But yeah, I think I'm more for it, really, and that it continues, really.
Yeah. So I've been told I've got to wrap up now. I could carry on this conversation for at least another half an hour. I mean, there's so much we haven't covered yet. So I just want to thank colleagues for taking part, and I hope watchers have found it interesting. And I can see Carly's appeared in front of me now. So thank you very much, everyone, and I'll pass back to Carly.
Great. That was such a great session. Thank you, everyone. We've got a couple of questions that I can share, but I think what you're talking about in terms of COVID was really obviously it was traumatic and all the terrible things that were going on, but really there was such a sense of collaboration and togetherness. And I think that that happened across the board, but it's really interesting to hear about all of the takeaways that you've kind of you've had from that time and how actually it set you up to be much more successful now. I think, you know, that's a real positive. So we've got a question from Joel asking, he's saying, post the COVID peak, have you found that public sector comms have become more difficult and protracted as colleagues and stakeholders are working more agile hours?
No. It's a short answer.
That's a quick answer, Marcus.
I mean, in my opinion, I feel that I mean, there's the old issue about agile communications and people from working from home. Are they, can bosses keep an eye on you to make sure you do your job properly? All that kind of malarkey. We've moved on massively since there, and actually, comms isn't 9 to 5. It never has been. So, I've got people in my team who've got children, who've got elderly parents they need to care for. They've got lives. But what's happened now? It's much easier to fit the work around their lives. Because I think the other interesting thing we learned about COVID is we have an insight now into people's lives we never had. So I never knew who had dogs or cats or children or I mean I know more about my team now than I did 2 years ago. But you also find out about fitting around their personal lives actually is a boon for us. So that means I know I've got someone who can work late. I've got, and the same to get hold of colleagues, and stakeholders. We just have to make it work, and I think it is working. That's my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, well, that's good. We've got another question, which Carrie-Anne did mention before, about one thing that she would take forward, and Carrie-Anne was saying about sort of looking after the well-being of her team. Emma or Simon, do you have any thoughts on what one thing you would want to keep or leave behind from the last few years?
Well, I'd love to. One thing I like to keep is the way we work with our communities. And we haven't really talked about certain aspects of that. I mean, we saw brilliant work where we're working with young social media influencers to engage other young people around the vaccine in order to build those authentic voices. And I think, building on that is something we'd definitely like to take forward. One thing I'd like to leave behind, well, probably in the early days, I'd like to leave the hours behind, because working 7 days a week, kind of 10 or 12 hours a day, sometimes not really sustainable, but obviously needed that particular at certain points of the response. But it's not something I particularly want to keep going forward if I can.
Yeah.
And shall I answer that? I think what I'd leave behind is the working hours as well. It was, often dealing with media, and it was just the sort of how it would go. So I don't miss that, working around the clock. But I think it's the relationships and the real camaraderie we had with local authority, charity, voluntary sector, but particularly London councils really coming together and helping us in the Mayor's office. So really keen that those relationships would still sustain and that the NHS wouldn't revert back into under our cave, and hope that, we don't have to work with those guys again. Yeah. And I think data is, that was a real, like we, at an NHS London level, we would start each meeting with a dashboard, which helped us make better decisions each day. And social media was part of that. About, it is a real barometer of how your public are feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. Thank you all so much. And I'm sure there'll be lots of people who are sort of nodding along with all of the things that you've learned along the way and still implementing now. So thank you so much. And we now have Stephen Waddington up next, talking about how to make more money with your PR career. So
I'm going to stay on for that one.
That sounds great.
Is he going to tell us what the silver bullet is? And just a reminder to share all of your posts on socials, tagging hashtag commsHERO. But thank you so much, Marcus, Simon, Emer, and Carrie-Anne. And we'll see you in the next session.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.